Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We hope everyone's indoors and dry. Stuart, I don't know if you know, but in New York, they're expecting a hurricane. So hopefully everyone is home and has the opportunity to join us this morning. Today, we have the privilege to hear from Stuart Rosenblatt, the president of the Irish Jewish Genealogical Society. Stuart compiled a database of over 60,000 individuals who lived in Ireland between 1700 and the present day, and includes people's date of birth, schools they attended, marriages, children, burial information, etc. Now, this is an incredible, useful tool for anyone who has roots in Ireland and desires to research their ancestry, which is actually a very popular hobby that many people have nowadays. Now, not only is it useful for people's personal identity, understanding where they come from, such a database serves a tremendous halachic benefit as well, as often people are required to procure documentation of their lineage for various reasons, such as making aliyah. And if every country would have such a database, it would make people's lives a lot easier. So it's most definitely a tremendous resource available to those who originate in Ireland. Now, a dear member, Dr. Alan Harris, will formally introduce today's speaker. Dr. Harris was privy to receive a truly unique Jewish education. He studied in Yeshiva Chachmei Tzarfat, which is in Aix-les-Bains, France. And this special, unique yeshiva was guided by a student of the Chafetz Chaim and placed a great value both on Torah study and secular knowledge, something that was quite uncommon a number of decades ago. Dr. Harris is a physician scientist and a medical entrepreneur who is responsible for the development and approval of over 17 drugs. He has decades of experience working in the field of pharmaceuticals. He is a wonderful individual with a sterling character, and we at Fifth Avenue Synagogue are truly blessed and honored to have him and his family as members for a number of years. I'd like to call upon Dr. Harris to formally introduce this morning's speaker.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your very kind words. So good morning, everyone, from West Hampton on Long Island, in the middle, literally in the middle of Hurricane Henry, that I hope will not interrupt at least my participation through the Zoom because of any outage that might occur. I'm certainly most gratified as an Irish Jewish member of the Fifth Avenue Synagogue, together with my American wife, Lori, my two Irish daughters, Sophie and Sasha, who then qualify, of course, as Irish Jews. That makes 3 members of Fifth Avenue Synagogue Irish Jews. I think we have broken a record in New York at least. And last but not least, my British brother, David, and his partner, Lynn. And I would like to introduce Stuart, who is the president of the Genealogical Society of Ireland, who has compiled over 25 years of painstakingly thorough research throughout the island of Ireland, and has created an absolutely unique resource for the study of the Irish Jewish community and its descendants, and crucially, its diaspora, and serves as a wonderful tool to identify the lineage of Irish Jews. In fact, no other national Jewish community has been so thoroughly researched and documented over a period spanning some 300 years. Now, in addition to the Irish Jewish Museum, Stuart has gifted this wonderful resource of 22 volumes to the National Archives of Ireland, the National Library of Ireland, and the Dublin City Library and Archive. Through this monumental labor of love, Stuart has created a resource that will be treasured for generations to come, not only by genealogists, but students and academics in several disciplines, as well as religious authorities, as Rabbi Babich referred to in terms of tracing the Jewish lineage of Irish Jewish nationals. Now, hopefully, and possibly through philanthropy, copies of these hugely important works may eventually be obtained for the National Library of Israel, the Library of Congress in the United States, and of course, the New York Public Library. And of interest is Stuart is constantly continues to add to this resource, and he encourages those with information to contact him. Now, in addition to covering the archival history of the Irish Jewish community, Stuart will also be covering the extraordinary contribution of Irish Jewish nationals to the history of Israel and Ireland and their fellow Irishmen at the highest levels of government and public office. And as you will hear, there is also a historical link to Fifth Avenue Synagogue. Last but not least, I would like to thank, of course, Stuart for making himself available, and also to thank Sheila Montgomery, Executive Director of the Fifth Avenue Synagogue, whose parents were born in Ireland, for her invaluable assistance in organizing this talk today. Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you. With a welcome like that, maybe somebody like you else, there's not very little else I can say. But as we will start off what George Burns would say, the entertainer, that a good talk should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the beginning and end should be very close together. Céad Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes on behalf of the Irish Jewish Genealogical Society, a division of the Irish Jewish Museum. I wish you good morning. In addition to talking about the archival history of the Irish Jewish community spanning 300 years and the outstanding contribution to Israel, we will mention the role of the Herzog family, Emanuel Jakobowicz, who left Ireland to be your rabbi, anti-Semitism, Ireland's attitude during the Second World War years, and early Jewish refugees. It may surprise you to know that there's been a Jewish presence in Ireland for nearly 1,000 years. There is a myth that the earliest Jewish inhabitants were from the lost tribe of Dan, who settled in the southwest coast of Ireland, bringing with them the harp, which, as you know, is Ireland's national symbol, and more importantly, the symbol of Guinness. It may surprise you to know that there's also been a Jewish presence in Ireland for 1,000 years. This is a myth that the early Jewish inhabitants were from the last Lord tribe, which I've just mentioned. But this brings me down to the Annals of Inishfollen, a chronicle of Irish medieval history written by the monks in 1079. And it notes 5 Jews came from over the seas to Todeldach, the king of Munster, and then were sent back over the sea again. It was 400 years later, following the expulsion of the Jews from Portugal and the Iberian Peninsula in 1496, that some Marano Jews who were merchants made their way to the south coast of Ireland. In the town of Youghal in County Cork, the first Jewish Marano Lord Mayor, William Ennis, a soldier of fortune, was elected in 1555, with another Jewish Lord Mayor elected in 1576 and 81, called Francis Ennis, although the exact relationship to William is unclear. It took another 300 years before the first Jewish Lord Mayor in Dublin in 1896 was elected. Mr. Womser Lewis Harris, regrettably, he died on the eve before he was installed, and it took another 60 years before Robert Briscoe was elected Lord Mayor of Dublin in 1956 and 61. His son Ben Briscoe in 1988, and in Cork, Gerald Briscoe in 1977. And not to leave out Otto Moses Jaffe, who was 4 times Lord Mayor of Belfast between 1899 and 1905. In 1655, Oliver Cromwell encouraged the Jewish people to resettle in the British Isles after 400 years in exile because he considered that their supposed wealth and reputation for industry was likely to advance the commercial interests of the country. These early settlers called themselves foreign Protestants. 5 years earlier, and also 5 years later, more likely, the earliest recorded synagogue was established consisting of a prayer room in Crane Lane opposite Dublin Castle by 3 Jews who practiced in secret. It was only after 5 years that they were known as Jewish. Up to then, they behaved as Christians, as the families had previously escaped the Spanish-Portuguese pogroms. Crane Lane was then the main street leading to the wharfs of the River Liffey. And due to a fire, the ceiling fell down, resulting in total destruction of any documents or artifacts, all lost for posterity. The oldest Jewish cemetery in Dublin dates from 1748. This cemetery was originally used from 1718 and is situated near the Ballybock Bridge, Clontarf, commonly known in its early years as the Jews' Fields. Ballybock gets its name from the Irish Ballybock, village of the poor. And the first interment recorded was for a Moses Jacob Cowan on the 16th of February 1748. He was 65 and a traveling dwarf. The cemetery closed in 1910. At the beginning of the 18th century, the Jewish presence had dwindled to 3 families, picking up in the 1820s, mainly from England, Germany, and Poland. By 1881, over 450 Hebrews had settled in Dublin. They spoke English and were quite prosperous. By this time, there was a synagogue in Mary's Abbey, just north of the River Liffey. The big influx to Ireland happened following the infamous Russian May laws of 1882. Boys from the age of 12 were to be conscripted into the Russian army for 25 years. Also, the frequency of pogroms increased. Cormac O'Grada writes, "The entire people were being herded by the conquering Cossacks into slavery. Children were taken from parents for slave labor in the mines and to labor camps by the Tsarist masters. This was a life sentence, and the parents preferred the ultimate risk of abandoning their children to the vagaries of an ocean voyage in the hope that they would eventually arrive in the land of the free." These followers of Moses had originally been invited to leave their homes in other countries like Poland by the princesses of Lithuania to open the hinterland, then unspoiled and unoccupied, because of their perceived industrial and business acumen, to establish the whiskey industry, which was too lowly for the princesses and minions to be involved in. Over 1 million left Lithuania and the Russian Pale, fleeing the persecution from Tsar Alexander II's Russia for safety of any country, as far away from the Russian Empire as possible, where they would be able to practice their religion, raise and educate their families, lead a peaceful life, and satisfy their thirst for freedom. The largest influx to Ireland occurred between 1882 and 1910, when approximately 3,000 arrived from Eastern Europe and settled mainly in Dublin, with smaller numbers settling in Belfast and Cork and other towns throughout Ireland. The question that is often asked, why Ireland? Ireland was a tributary to the Great Litvak movement of Eastern European Hebrews westward for somewhat what called England Ireland, and then traveled to the land of the free, America, the Golden Medina, where the hope was that they would earn enough money in order to complete their journey. Many of them did indeed complete the journey, and others got sidetracked to South Africa. Unfortunately, many stayed in the Emerald Isle. Thousands wished to live in London. The established British community felt these new impoverished newcomers would be a burden on the communal coffers and disperse them through other towns throughout the British Isles. Hence, Belfast and Dublin, being major cities, received a number of these newcomers. There was also boatloads of impoverished brethren who had insufficient money, who landed in Ireland, hoping that this was the first stage of the travel to America, when they could afford the onward fare. Many migrants were sold tickets to New York and shortchanged by ruthless agents and captains. they were told that they were in America when they were in fact in Cork and Cove. Others say because of their broken English led them to think the cry, "Cork, Cork," was a call for New York, New York. Most were so desperate to leave Russia-controlled Lithuania and Latvia that they took the first available vessel irrespective of destination. Others ran out of kosher food. Some were so seasick they would not travel any further. Some had children on the way, and others needed to earn some money to travel further. The majority of the Irish Jewish community came from a Lithuanian shtetl called Akmian. The earlier ones found that Ireland was not a bad place to be in and wrote home or sent tickets, and the families and friends began to arrive in even greater numbers. My grandfather, Avram Hillel Jackson Zaks, came from Akmian. There are branches of the Zaks Jacksons who lived in Cork and Dublin, who eventually went to America and South Africa, whose origins are all from that village of Akmeni. These newcomers settled south of the Dublin city centre in an area what is eventually dubbed Little Jerusalem. Many of the immigrants became door-to-door peddlers selling household wares and holy pictures, and were known as weekly men in Yiddish, or weekly men, as their door-to-door rounds took a week to complete. They engaged in money lending, tailoring, and small manufacturing enterprises. The second generation would eventually go on to become a major force in manufacturing of clothing and furniture, giving employment to hundreds of Irish workers. In the 1940s, the Irish Jewish Orthodox community reached its peak of 5,500 and declined ever since, with Cork closing its synagogue after 89 years in 2016. Today, Belfast is just about hanging in with 65 Orthodox members and Dublin 170 subscribers. The Progressive congregation in Dublin have about 180 members. The Irish Jewish population saw a drop in the numbers after the establishment of Israel in 1948, with many moving there out of ideological and religious convictions. In addition, with the decline in births compounded with intermarriage and lack of employment opportunities, more would emigrate to the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia for better economic purposes. One of the most famous Irish Jewish characters, which you may all know, is Leopold Bloom by James Joyce, whose portrayal in his novel Ulysses of his encounters in Dublin in the 16th of June, 1904. This is pure fiction, and what fiction it may be, but many a professor has made a living perpetrating this myth, bringing to Ireland hundreds of visitors for Bloomsday. One of the most remembered of the sons of Erin is Robert Emmet Bobby Briscoe. He was involved in the revolutionary politics in Ireland and Ireland's first Jewish Lord Mayor. Briscoe had been an Irish Republican Army gunrunner. He was a colorful character, equally proud of being an Irishman and Jewish, a Zionist who instructed Zev Jabotinsky in guerrilla warfare. At the height of the Irish Civil War, he helped orchestrate an occupation by walking brazenly into the Irish consulate office in New York and commandeering the premises on behalf of the Irish Republican government. His token occupation did not last long, and he allowed himself to be removed without charge by sympathetic Irish New York cops. People in New York will remember him best for his 1956 St. Patrick's Day parade, where, as the first Jewish Irish Lord Mayor of Dublin, he shared the viewing stand on Fifth Avenue with Mayor Wagner. The bands of Manhattan's Fifth Avenue blasting Irish tunes with marchers carrying the American and Irish flags. The city's rabbis debated whether the parade marching was Shom or Shabbat. After starting at 11 a.m. from 44th Street through Fifth Avenue past the synagogue, I wonder if the service was near completion and the congregation, when leaving, just happened to be enclosed by the onlookers. Somehow, I do not think he stopped over for a Fifth Avenue at the Fifth Avenue Synagogue for a l'chaim. His USA tour proved a resounding success, and he reportedly raised tens of millions of dollars for the United Jewish Appeal, with the Irish New York Tourist Office reported that travel requests had jumped 20% over the previous month. Robert's son, Joe Briscoe, who I was privileged to know, was a dental surgeon and commandant in the Irish Army from 1957 to 1999, the equivalent of major in the US Army, and was the last serving officer to wear the Emergency Service Medal. He served in the Irish Army Reserve 11th Field Medical Company, and at his funeral, he was afforded an honor color party at his graveside. Another son, Ben Briscoe, was a member of the Irish Parliament for 37 years and followed his father's footsteps to become Lord Mayor in 1987. In addition to Robert Briscoe, another person of Irish political importance is Chaim Herzog, born in Belfast to become the 6th president of Israel, a post held from 1983 to 1993. In 1935, Chaim left to study in the British Mandate of Palestine and studied in the Hebron Yeshiva and later in the Government of Palestine Law School in Jerusalem. A year later, joined the Haganah Underground Army and later traveled to England to study law at the University College London and Cambridge. During World War II, he joined the British Army, participated in the D-Day landings, and was one of the first Allied soldiers to enter Bergen-Belsen in April 1945. He retired from the Israeli military in 1962 with the rank of Major General, and during the 1967 Six-Day War, his Irish accented voice reassured Israelis on the progress of the conflict. In 1972, Chaim co-founded Herzog, Fox and Newman, today one of Israel's largest law firms. In 1975, Chaim accepted the post of Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. His finest moment came on November the 10th, 75, when a defiant gesture of contempt from the rostrum of the UN General Assembly, Ambassador Herzog tore in two the recently adopted resolution 3379, which declared that Zionism was a form of racism. In 1985, President Herzog made a state visit to Ireland, during which he unveiled a commemoration plaque in his old home in 33 Bloomfield Avenue in Dublin, and officially opened the Irish Jewish Museum in Walworth Road, which was previously a synagogue. He visited his old school in Wesley College and traveled to Sneem Cultural Park in County Kerry, where he dedicated a sculpture as a tribute to his childhood friend, Cachal O'Doyle, and the fifth president of Israel, fifth president of Ireland. President Herzog made headlines during his Irish state visit because he started every speech with off-the-cuff remarks in fluent Irish. At his funeral in 1997, he was eulogized by Israel's Prime Minister Shimon Peres as perhaps the most statesmanlike person Israel ever knew. They say that the apple never falls far from the tree, and it is Chaim's father I next address. Isaac Halevi Herzog was born in Poland and brought to Britain at the age of 9. He was considered an Ilu, a genius, for his mastery of the Talmud, and received international recognition with his doctorate thesis in 1913, when he identified the elusive Mazuz sea snail as the most likely candidate as a source of Tzachlich blue-purple dye used in the talus in ancient Israel. Thanks to Rabbi Herzog's discovery, Jews around the world could start wearing the tachlit that had been lost for 1,300 years. In 1916, the Belfast Jewish community were in need of a rabbi, and the search focused on a student rabbi studying the Sorbonne in Paris. Although he was the son of a London rabbi, he had no experience as a practicing congregational minister. He had a reputation as a Talmudic scholar. He was hired sight unseen, and a ticket to Belfast was dispatched. The president of the synagogue and a retinue of executives lined up at the train station, waiting for the young rabbi's arrival. The train arrived, the passengers emptied, and there was no sign of the rabbi. An alert community member jumped on the train and found Rabbi Herzog immersed in a Gemara, unaware of his arrival in Belfast. In 1921, the Dublin community were in need of a communal rabbi. They approached Rabbi Herzog, who accepted this invitation with his family moving to Dublin. He was recognized as Chief Rabbi of Ireland by the revolutionary Irish government even before formal independence from Britain. In 1936, having left Dublin, he was elected Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi of the British Mandate of Palestine and of Israel after its independence in 1948. In an Irish Times editorial, it said that the election of Rabbi Herzog as Palestine's new chief rabbi of the Ashkenazi community reflected well upon the Irish nation and his reputation for kindness. His son Chaim remembers IRA leaders on the run hiding in the family home in Dublin, which earned Rabbi Herzog the title Sinn Féin Rabbi. In July this year, Isaac Herzog followed in his father Chaim's footsteps by becoming Israel's 11th prime minister. The name Emanuel Jacobowitz should be familiar to you. Rabbi Jacobowitz, before being appointed rabbi of the Fifth Avenue Synagogue in 1958 until 1966, was chief rabbi of Southern Ireland's Jewish community. In 1948, he visited Ireland to address the summer school run by the United Kingdom-based Jewish youth study groups in County Dublin. The communal leaders invited the young rabbi to spend a weekend in Dublin with them. His impressive speaking skills and charismatic personality galvanized the disparate congregations in Dublin. They unanimously invited him to become Ireland's chief rabbi and filled the post that had been vacant for 13 years since Rabbi Isaac Herzog left to become chief rabbi of Palestine in 1936. When he was appointed at the age of 27 in 1949, he made a commitment to stay for 10 years. At the new chief rabbi's installation ceremony, the Prime Minister, John Costello, announced that in honor of Rabbi Jacobowitz, the Irish government was extending de facto recognition of the new state of Israel, so 9 months after the birth of the new state. In 1958, Rabbi Jacobowitz accepted the invitation to be your rabbi. 9 years later, returning to England, was appointed chief rabbi of the United Congregations of the United Kingdom and Commonwealth from 1967 for the next 24 years. In 1981, he was knighted. He became Lord Jacobowitz, also the first rabbi in British history to enter the House of Lords as Baron Jacobowitz, and the first Jewish person to be awarded the Lambert Doctor of Divinity by the Archbishop of Canterbury. No matter how great a man is, the person who keeps him and his family together is the partner in life, Amelia, his wife, many who you will remember as a wonderful person in her own right. Another notable Dublin-born Irishman is Max Abelman, who you may have known as Max Mann from Dublin, together with Larry Lewis from Belfast. They were founder members of the Loyal League of the Yiddish Sons of Erin in 1964. St. Patrick's Day parade in New York meant green beer. But 50 years ago, it also meant green matzo balls at the League's annual gala dinner and banquet at the Americana Hotel, complete with a big band, kosher corned beef, and green bagels. As someone remarked, getting together was like a family. It was a party. Someone would take out a harmonica and start playing, and they all started singing. It was really a hoot. There's nothing quite like listening to Yiddish spoken in an Irish accent. My late Uncle Leo Jackson was a member. Another notable Irish person of Irish parentage is Gerald Yoel Goldberg, who was the first Jewish Lord Mayor of Cork in 1977. He was a distinguished criminal lawyer and art collector. He was born in Cork in 1912 to Lithuanian parents from Ackmeny. His father, Lewis, had been beaten up during the Limerick pogrom instigated by the Redemptionist priest Father John Craig's anti-Jewish sermon in 1904. It was an economic boycott. No one was killed. The family left for Cork with 7 children, which also forced out most of the Jewish families who had made a home in Limerick, having fled the Russian pogroms a few years earlier, now to find that they were on the move again. In 1937, Goldberg set up a committee to help Jewish refugees fleeing from the Nazis. However, the reluctance of the Irish to accept Jewish refugees led him to accuse successive governments of acting in coldness and indifference towards his brethren and their tragedy. In 1951, he tangled with the mayor of Limerick over the city's treatment of his brethren almost a half a century earlier. Mr. Goldberg was elected an independent alderman to the Cork Corporation and was an unsuccessful candidate for the mayor in 1970. However, 7 years later, in 1977, at the age of 65, he was elected the first Jewish Lord Mayor in the history of the city. The Jewish community of Cork peaked in the 1930s at about 450 souls, declining through the second half of the 20th century. In the 1950s, it numbered about 300 and it had its own rabbi. By the 1970s, this number had fallen to 20 and was no longer served by a rabbi. Today, the community is no longer, with the synagogue closing in 2016. But I should mention today there's also a new community that have formed recently, and they meet in various houses. The second marriage to take place in the synagogue at 10 South Terrace, Cork, on the 20th of August, 1891, where my grandparents, Avram Hillel Jackson of Ackmeny, to Sarah Gavonsky of Kilkalai in Lithuania. And this brings me to Ireland's neutrality in World War II and its attitude towards the Jewish people in this period. The Irish state, although overwhelmingly Catholic at the time, economically poor, culturally inwardly looking and dependent on the United Kingdom market for its agricultural exports. Although the 1937 Constitution, ratified by the people in a referendum, especially recognizes the Jewish congregations in Ireland and guarantees their religious freedom. During the Second World War, the country did little to assist Jews desperately seeking to escape Nazi Germany. Ireland's envoy in Berlin, Charles Bewley, was anti-Semitic, and during his time in office from 33 to 39, sent reports back to Dublin discouraging any acceptance of Jewish immigration. Fewer than 100 obtained visas from Bewley's office. He was dismissed by the Irish government in 1939, just as the war broke out. By September 1939, a general European war was inevitable. On the 2nd of September, President de Valera advised the Irish government that neutrality was the best policy for the country. And this he was almost uniformly supported by the government and the country at large. This gave sweeping powers for the duration of the emergency, such as internment, censorship of press, correspondence, and government's control of the economy. The Emergency Powers Act finally lapsed in September 1946. The Department of Justice adopted a deliberate, closed, and go-slow policy in dealing with the Jewish refugees in the wake of the Holocaust and before. In a confidential memo to the Department of External Affairs, Justice Secretary Peter Barry wrote, and though there were only 3,907 Jews in Southern Ireland according to the 1946 census, there was a fairly strong anti-Semitic feeling throughout the country. This feeling, he said, is perhaps based on historical reasons. The fact that the Jews have remained separate community within the community and have not permitted themselves to be assimilated, and for the numbers, they appear to be disproportionate wealth and influence. This statute remains throughout the war, despite pressure from Chamberlain and Churchill, who offered De Valera a united Ireland in return for military assistance. However, President De Valera did accept a request from Northern Ireland for fire tenders to assist in fighting fires following the Belfast Blitz in 1942. Famously, and against strong expressed advice of his advisors, President De Valera offered his condolences to the German minister in Dublin on the death of Hitler in 1945, in accordance with the diplomatic protocols applying to neutral states. Robert Briscoe, the only Jewish deputy in the Dáil at the time, made a request for the permission of 42 people of Hungarian and Czech origin who had escaped from behind the Iron Curtain to Austria, and they were refused. Although overt anti-Semitism was not typical, the Southern Irish were indifferent to the Nazis' persecution of those fleeing the Third Reich. A successful applicant in 1938 was typically a wealthy, middle-aged or elderly single from Austria, Roman Catholic, and desiring to retire in peace in Ireland and not to engage in employment. Only a few Viennese bankers and industrialists met the strict criteria of being Catholic, although possibly of Jewish descent, capable of supporting themselves comfortably without involving themselves in the life of the country. The medical and legal professions appear on par with each other. In Ireland, there were many luminaries, including Justice Herbert Wine, Justice Herman Good, Minister Alan Shatter, Minister Mervyn Taylor, with Ronnie Appleton QC in Belfast, all contributing greatly to Irish society and a great credit to the Irish Jewish community and the country of Ireland. Mervyn Taylor could be regarded as the most important member of the Irish Jewish community to play a role in Ireland's Labour Party politics. He was a member of the Dáil. He became Ireland's first ever Jewish cabinet minister, holding posts of the Minister of Equality and Law and Reform and Minister of Labour. Following the successful divorce referendum, it was Mervyn Taylor who shepherded divorce legislation through the Irish Parliament. He was not the first Jewish member of the Labour Party. That distinction goes to Dublin solicitor Herman Good. He was appointed judge of the district court in 1966 and earned a reputation as an opponent of corporal punishment and as an advocate of prison reform. In 1943, he was involved in the initiative to accept 500 Jewish children from France. This was challenged by Oliver J. Flanagan in the Dáil, and President Eamon de Valera denied that the children were Jewish. The assurances from the Irish and American governments that Ireland would accept the children, and Judge Good's assurances of the Irish government that the Jewish community would help look after the orphans, nothing was done to rescue them. Father Dennis Fahy accused the Jews of being part of a world conspiracy based on the well-known wealth and power. Judge Good at the time, in a lecture in 1943, so powerful are we that we cannot even get back even our own small country for ourselves. It never fails to intrigue me how various families are entwined either directly or indirectly. Dublin-born Alan Harris, a member of your congregation, physician and scientist, a recognized and celebrated leader in successful drug development, an anti-cancer drug, and now the mainstay of medical care for many thousands of patients throughout the world, improving and extending their life expectancy, remains the worldwide gold standard to this day, 33 years later. Alan's parents were married in the Cork Synagogue in 1948, with an indirect association to one of Ireland's most well-respected previous ministers. Alan's father, Sidney Harris, was in partnership with Jaime Danker and his brother Ephraim in the antique business in Dublin. They were very fine gentlemen. Ephraim's daughter, Carol Danker, in 1973, married solicitor Alan Shatter, who, as government minister, contributed greatly to Irish society. When opening a Holocaust exhibition, he called on the Irish nation to examine its conscience on the state's shameful treatment of Jews fleeing Nazi genocide. Ireland shut its doors to German Jews trying to escape the persecution and death, he said, citing the view of Ireland's ambassador to Berlin, who said such refugees would be a contamination. His speech brought, predictably, text to radio stations that Shatter should go back to where he came from, meaning Israel. It's a taunt he heard so many times in his long political career that he can laugh it off, saying, "Do you mean Rathgar or Rathfarnham, where I was born and raised? I don't know if they'd have me back." In 2011, he was appointed Minister of Justice and Equality and Defense, the highest position ever attained by any Jewish politician in Irish history. He devised a festive citizenship ceremony where applicants made their declaration of fidelity to the nation and loyalty to the state. In the first 2 years, 42,000 persons from 170 countries were granted Irish citizenship with the words, "Today you become citizens of a republic, a constitutional democracy which recognizes the personal rights of each of you as individuals." He no doubt had in mind the intense pride in which the Jewish immigrants used to receive the naturalization certificates in the late 19th and early 20th century, and mindful at the later critical period in Irish history, the state had been less than welcoming of Jewish immigrants and the country's attitude preventing them from seeking asylum from Nazi Germany. There are two people who have not been mentioned. Tommy Reichenthal, author of I Was a Boy in Belsen, who lived the horrors of that superior race Nazi Germany, for 60 years, never mentioned his experiences, now has spoken to over 60,000 school children on tolerance and forgiveness. He was awarded for this work the Medal of Honor, the highest accolade to be given by the Federal Republic of Germany in 2014 for work combating racism, bigotry, and promoting tolerance and reconciliation. The International of the Year Award in 2014, degree of Doctor of Literature honoris causa by Maynooth University in 2015, and Doctor of Law, Trinity College Dublin, also in 2015. And not forgetting the Bar of Ireland Human Rights Award in 2019. When you're in the company of Tommy, you know you're in the presence of greatness. Another person I'd like to mention is Yankee Fachler, who has kept the Irish Jewish community together during this pandemic, needs to be also mentioned. He is a historian, communicator, radio presenter, columnist, ghostwriter, corporate trainer, who for 3-4 times each week delivers a Zoom talk on a wide range of subjects of Jewish interest. These Zoom meetings have brought 50 to 70 isolated people together when otherwise they wouldn't have had the opportunity due to lockdown to at least know they were not alone. A worthy person to speak to you. It is not all doom and gloom in Ireland. It is a wonderful country with green grass due to all the rain and fresh air, where Jewish life is not interfered with, probably because of so few. Today, the government is pro-Palestinian, with the general public not interested or concerned. To quote Ben Briscoe, "It is wonderful to be Irish, but to be Irish and Jewish is unique." To finish before your questions, I have a dilemma and a request. For the last 25 years, the Irish Jewish Genealogical Society has recorded over 68,500 individuals who were born and married, as well as those who were married into and out of the tenets of Abraham. The dilemma is what to do with the 23 volumes of which there are only 5 copies printed by me, plus associated working papers on Jewish Ireland, especially now that I have to admit, reaching the autumn of my years. What is needed is a home for these documents, and ask you to nominate an institution where future generations may study Irish Jewish ancestry and their contribution to worldwide society in general. Also, if anyone has an Irish Jewish connection, especially if belonging to the Jackson-Zaks-Skowronski lineage, my family, please make contact, either by phone or email. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I knew it would be a fascinating presentation.
We're going to have a slaunch, as we say.
It certainly would. And I was just thinking the only thing that could improve it would be to sit here with a pint of Guinness.
Oh, I don't like Guinness.
But thank you very much. What a pleasure to have you. And thank you to Dr. Harris for arranging for this morning's program. Truly, one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been that we have been able to extend our reach and have better access to foremost authorities around the world, such as yourself. So we thank you for navigating the time difference and for being here with us today. I want to thank also our audience. We're so thrilled that you could join us this morning, and you may ask your questions through the chat or Q&A function. Please feel free to submit them, and I'll try to pass on as many as I can. In the meantime, I had a few myself, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the relationship, if any, between English and Irish Jews. Dr. Harris, for example, mentioned before the program started that he has an English brother who was born in London. And I was wondering if there are any notable parallels or differences between the English and Irish experiences.
I don't think. I think everybody came over with the same experiences. They came from the same towns or areas there. They ended up with nothing. They worked hard and moved on. England is a much, they went to the various colonies. No, there wouldn't be very much in the, I have to remember that Ireland and Britain are one country, or were, up to 1922. It's only after 1922 that Ireland became an independent unit on its own, but it's all English. It's basically English.
And do they know each other? I mean, do Irish Jews know English Jews? Are there, relationships there?
Of course there is. They all married. One way. During the war, quite a number of young men came over, mainly to avoid this conscription into the army, and they married Irish girls, and they came backwards and forwards, of course. There's mishpacha everywhere, even in America. What did I work out today? I had 1,319 people in New York. I associated to New York alone. I can't work out how many people in America, but there's thousands all around.
Yeah. Yes. As I was doing a little bit of preparation for the program today, I also noticed that there was a very prominent woman involved in Irish politics. And please forgive me if I say the name incorrectly, but I think it was Edith Cuff, the Countess of Desart. She was one of the first women appointed to the Irish Senate. And I was wondering if this is someone that you were familiar with.
I am familiar with the name, but obviously the Countess of Desart married the Count, who was not Jewish. But unless I look into my computer, I can't find. I'd have to look into that. I'm not a historian. I have to tell you, I concern myself with the data of individuals and their lineage going up and down, so that in years to come, people will know who they are and where they came from. And with 68,000 records controlled.
Yeah. For someone who's not a historian, you sure know an awful lot of history. It was a wonderful presentation. So let me see if we have any other questions from our audience. There are several greetings to you from different people, and thanks. Someone's asking, what is Jewish life like in Ireland today? I think you spoke to that. I was a little curious as to what the experience might be at university, and if there's, there's such pervasive anti-Semitism around the world at different universities. Are Irish Jewish students experiencing that in the same way?
I would personally say, and I have no qualification on this, that any of the students would not be going to Irish universities, not because they don't wish to, but because there's very few Jewish people of that age group living in Ireland. It's a very old community now, and they'd be going abroad to gain a better experience and also to meet Jewish people and mix within the Jewish framework. That there are hundreds and hundreds of people on secondment in Southern Ireland and in Belfast and Northern Ireland as well, but they're not belonging to the Orthodox area or to the progressive area. They're not known, they're not known even to me. I know in Cork there's 60 people, but they're not known to me at all.
Yeah.
So the answer is no, they wouldn't be going to the university, and if they do,
Yeah.
only one or two.
I see. And so would that mean also that there are no Jewish day schools or yeshivas? Do students have to leave the country to go to yeshiva, or are there some Jewish schools there?
Right. Well, within the Jewish community, yeshiva would not be high on their list. As for a Jewish school, there is a Jewish school where children go to, can go to, and then they leave to go to other schools as well. They get a great education there, but a lot of non-Jewish people go as well. You have to remember the numbers are very small, really small. I mean, if you got 170 people, and I'm in the senior years, and all my contemporaries who are there are in their senior years, there's no young people coming in. I don't think there's been a marriage there for years.
Right.
And the birth rate is nil. And if they are, it's 1.2, it's a 1.1, 1.2. So there's no regeneration. And people are older. There's an old age home. Used to have an old age home which closed, and the people went up to somewhere else. Now they're living to 100 years of age, but they're not going to get married again and have more children.
Right. So probably not big enough to sustain kosher restaurants, for example.
No, there's no kosher butcher shop there now. It's been transferred into a supermarket. If they're doing it, there's a shop opened up in the synagogue to supply kosher food. But it's smaller and smaller.
And do you have a sense of how many Orthodox shuls are left in the country total?
All right. Well, there's one in Belfast. There's one in Dublin. That's it.
Yeah.
There's only two synagogues as such. That's it. I mean, your precept of Ireland is only a little. It'll fit into New York, Ireland, maybe Manhattan. It's not a big place.
Is Chabad active there?
Oh yes, we have a wonderful rabbi, Zalman Lent, but he is a Chabad rabbi. We don't have a Chabad house.
I see. So maybe that will invigorate the community somewhat, as they've been so successful around the world.
Well, invigorate to what? They come around, they come in and they're davening 3 times a day. I mean, come on. What are they bringing into Ireland? Are they being productive? Are they being manufacturing, supplying? Are they giving employment?
Do you have a sense that the small Jewish community there is sustainable?
There'll always be a Jewish community in Dublin, always. There has been for hundreds and hundreds of years, even if it's only 20.
Yeah.
But it'll have to change, it'll morph. The older people are getting older. The younger ones coming in are still in their 50s or 60s. And then what? So it'll have to change and become smaller, more concise.
Very good. Well, thank you again. This was just a fascinating presentation. Thank you to everyone who joined us by Zoom. Thank you to Dr. Harris, and I'll turn it back over to Rabbi Babich.
All right.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Dr. Harris, as well. And thank you, Stuart. It was a truly informative, well researched, and interesting presentation. that gave us a glimpse in the world that many of us in America, New York, are not privy to. Just one quick question for you. In your research to compile this database, I know researching a lineage is not a simple task. Not everyone has documentation. Sometimes you have to consult with many people. So I was curious what challenges you encountered when you were putting together this database in terms of accurately recording all the different relationships that took place.
I'm not sure from your question. What do you want to know? How I go about acquiring the information, or
right,
how I control it?
How you acquired it and what challenges you may have. I assume not every family had everything neatly organized in a folder to present you. What exactly was the process that you were able to trace 300 years of Jewish presence in Ireland?
Well, it's very hard to put down 25 years of research in 2 seconds. Well, first of all, I started off doing my own family, and that brought me down to the museum, where I found documentation there that hadn't seen the light of day for 100 years. And I put that into a database. Then I went to the Bethlehem and realized that nobody had recorded, and the records that were kept by the Bethlehem were disgraceful. So I recorded all that. And then I spent 6 years going up and down the graveyard in Dolphin's Barn, codifying every grave, acquiring the information from the secretarial book, the burial records, the inscriptions on all on the tombstones, and also found details elsewhere. There's Yortzeit plaques in the synagogue and where people put up in the museum. And that's just one area. Then there was naturalization records. Hundreds of people were naturalized. I found those. Then there's the 1901 and 1911 census. Then there's marriage records, hundreds of them. And they're all, each individual has to be found and put into their own database, into a database. But then what do you do with all the databases? So I had to get a program designed that would incorporate all this information, and I had to piecemeal put them all in and say, is this person the same as that person? The next part was to, well, obviously design the program, which has improved over the years. And now the important part is to speak to people to get more details, individuals. And remember, today, you may be here today, but tomorrow you're history. We're all history. So you need to get the details down now. You need to know what cemetery people are in so they can go to. It's no use saying died in New York. What's the cemetery? There may be dozens down there. There's 7 cemeteries in Ireland. Where do they get married? It could be married. People were married in a place called Waterford, but there's no synagogue in Waterford. Yes, there was a prayer room in Waterford where people could daven go for Yontif, but it wasn't a recognized place for administration of marriage. So the marriage book was brought from Cork to there. That's you have to find all this. It's on and on and on. And that's why I like to go over and meet people. When you're speaking face to face, you get an opportunity. And that's where the information is gleaned from. And also they will be presented with an outline family tree, so they can see them there. A lot of people are doing the family history in the schools. Maybe you're in your school, you have an exercise at a certain age. They start their family tree. At least they'll have their parents and their aunties and uncles around. It's no use doing it when you're 50 and 60, when 90% of them all passed on, because a person of 90 or 80 or 90 has nearly 200 years of library information in them. They know where they came from. They know the history going back. Minor details. Sorry, does that answer your question?
Yes, tremendous amount of work. Yes, tremendous amount of
yes,
effort. And
should ask my wife. She's listening in another room. She'll soon tell you. A widow. Yes, sir. Alan Harris.
Yes, Stuart, first of all, thank you very much for a wonderful talk, a tour de force, describing the history and contributions of of the Irish Jewish members of our faith. I know that we have a few photos, if allowed, just for a minute or two, of your wonderful contribution, your books. And I was wondering whether Sheila could just put them up for us, because I think it's something we talked about. Sheila?
Yes, coming up.
Thank you. And Stuart, here, you can perhaps just comment on it quickly.
Oh yes, this is the Idiot's Guide to Irish Jewish Ancestry. I got 200 print. This is the only published book that I have. I got 200 printed, and I need to sell 300 to break even. The photograph there is of my parents, my father, and my grandparents, brothers and sisters. And there's none left. It's out of print now. There's none left.
I happen to have, just for those who are curious, I do have a copy. There's one in New York.
There's one in New York, yes.
And Sheila, the next one? Ah,
yes. Well, this is my, what I call my Book of Kells. I don't know if anybody knows the Book of Kells. This here is my personal copy for myself for my 70th birthday. It has over 52,000 individual records, but the book itself is leather bound, 110 acid-free paper. And it's a one-off, and it's a family heirloom, which I have here with me here in London. A similar, yes, okay, that's that one. That's my personal copy. That isn't for, that's not going out of my jurisdiction for the moment, unless I get an offer I can't refuse.
Here's the pile of books.
I recognize this person here. He's leaning on his books. My family are going to tell me they're going to use them as doorstops later on in years. But these are a selection of my books at the time, and that's what they look like.
I think Sheila, there might be some others.
Yes, I came across this yesterday, and it's from it's a flyer that's in the Irish Jewish Museum. They put it up on the net, and it's of the Yiddish Sons of Aaron, which I mentioned before from a souvenir journal in 1979. Again, my uncle was one of the members there, Leo Jackson.
So can you just take us through why there are 3 flags?
Well, one is for Ireland, naturally.
Yes.
And you have America, which is the main one up here, land of the free, and Israel. So you have the combination of the 3, which is very nice to see. I've never seen this before until yesterday.
Yeah, so I think it exemplifies certainly the connection between Ireland, Israel, and the United States. So, and I think you mentioned that you have records on over 1,300 New York Jews who have an Irish ancestry.
Well, they have a connection. A lot of people may have married years back, and they maybe a generation or 2 or 3 down the line, but still they have this connection. A lot of people are now looking for EU passports. So they come to me to see if their lineage, if they find that their parent or grandparent, maybe a great-grandparent, was born in Ireland, then they can apply for an EU passport.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the benefits. We also have people using it for inheritance purposes. Who do you think you are? The programs. There's lots of different reasons why people are now using things I never thought of before. So there you are. Do you have another one coming up?
I think
that's it.
That's it. Okay. Well, all I can say is thank you very much for having me today. It's been an honor to speak to you. Maybe I'll be asked again at a later stage. If anybody would like to see how my program works, the if you have the time, I can give you a quick demonstration on that. But maybe the majority of people would like to get a cup of tea and a biscuit. After all, what time is it there now?
12:05.
12:05. Well, I've missed my 4 o'clock,
Yes.
my afternoon tea. No scones and cream and jam and butter, Irish butter.
So I think you mentioned just in closing that those who think that they might have Irish ancestry should contact you via email that's on the program.
Oh yes, of course. On the phone, I've turned my phone off for now. So I hope you get loads of phone calls coming in. And if they look into the website irishjewishroots.com, they will get a lot of information there about various things, but they can also make contact with me through there. It's only a phone call. I'm on WhatsApp, so it doesn't cost them anything. I had a query. Somebody did contact me. I can't afford the phone call. It's expensive phoning. Didn't matter they're looking for information in my time, but it's expensive phoning. So there you are. You can't win them all. Okay.
Rachel?
Thank you very much. No, I think we're all set. Thank you.
Okay, I think we had 37 people. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, we had more even in the middle.
They had more than that.
And we
Okay.
send out the recording tomorrow, and so people can listen on their own time if they weren't able to come to the presentation.
All right. Is there just 4 of us now looking on? Who's on?
We still have the audience.
Oh, the audience as well. All right. I'm going to say good vach. That's an Irish term, good vach, yes? With an Irish accent. I was thinking, what will I say in Irish, in Yiddish and Irish? Somebody said they like to hear Yiddish, and everything I knew was only swear words, so I can't use that. I have to be very polite, especially with the rabbi there. I must thank you both, you, Alan and Eli, for your very kind words, and for you, Rachel, for looking after me.
Oh, Mr. Rosenblatt, I actually had one more question. I'm so sorry. I wanted to ask you, where is the Irish Jewish Museum? Is it in Dublin?
Oh yes, in Walworth Road.
Ah, okay.
In
Okay,
Walworth Road. There used to be a synagogue there, and in that area, thousands of Jewish people lived in it, lived there. Yes.
Thank you.
And it's closed at the moment, but you can make contact with them and they'll look after you.
A destination for the next trip. Thank you.
Oh, let me know and I may go over and meet you. All right.
Wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to say cheerio, a welcome cup of cha.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Stuart.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Alan. And thank you, Rachel. And everyone should have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rabbi.
Bye, Stuart.